Hello minders, welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. Well, you know, I've been in Nan Blockley's books today and just thinking I'd love to experiment some more with doing some spontaneous landscapes, but experimenting with texture. And spontaneous landscapes for me is always a way to learn, test, try, explore. Now, if you're not familiar with Nan Blockley, I did a review on a couple of her books back in my Christmas gift episode in November. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the books here right now. Just wanted to let you know what kind of inspired what I'm going to do today. And I really wanted to push the texture, which is why I'm kind of steeped in her books today. She's got all kinds of techniques, you know, from Granulation Medium, which I'm going to try a little of that today. Something that I haven't really tried is dropping, well, she uses gouache or white ink sometimes. We'll drop ink or gouache into her washes. I want to try a little of that. Maybe some salt. I don't do salt very often. I thought about maybe doing some drawing with a stick, you know, pulling paint out with a stick. Her books are always inspiring. So we're starting out with a Hahnemuhle collection block, 300 pound, 640 GSM hot press. And I want the hot press because it tends to show granulation a little more than cold press does. Today, rather than on an easel, I have my camera overhead, and that's because I'm keeping this nearly flat. It's actually not quite flat, maybe 5-degree angle. I've taped off a 9 by 12, roughly 9.5 by 12.5 block. All right, this is totally spontaneous, so here we go. I think I'm going to stay in the Prussian Blue to gold and rusty color family. As I put the colors down, I'll try to mention them, and of course in the description I will list them. I think I'm going to start with a background wash, so I will pre-wet the paper. And we'll probably be using a lot of water, which is another reason that I am using the 300 pound. I am putting no pressure at all, but I found these Sterling Edwards blending and glazing brushes, the stiffness, just helps get that water in the paper a little quicker. I'm just letting the weight of the brush glide over the top, but I want it soaked. Start off with, let's use the Princeton Neptune 3/4 inch oval wash. I'm going to start with my lightest background washes. This is going to be some nickel quinacridone gold, a little bit of Indian yellow. No pre-plans here at all. So I'm going to let the paint tell me what to do. I've got little bits of blue in here, so it's going to probably skew green. Right now I'm just trying to get a background tone. Let's get some sprigs of interest going here, and this will all dry very light. I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit of Ultramarine Blue and Prussian Blue and just add some wisps of sky. Nice little kind of creeping downwards. I like that. That's fine. Like to establish where a ground plane is going to be. Squeeze out my brush a little bit. Just pick up some spots here and there to keep some contrast. I'm going to go ahead and introduce my Prussian Blue, kind of blue cool side, and see where that goes. It's so wet that it's spreading kind of fast, so I may need to let this dry a little bit. Let's go ahead and get a few more shapes in there. I'm going to pull in some red iron oxide just to mute that some. Get a little more foresty green going there. Right now I'm just looking for interesting compositional array of sorts. We've got a nice spread here. That's pretty cool. Alright, let's see what a little salt will do. I've got this sea salt grinder. A lot of times you don't see the salt effects except in the darker areas. When it comes to salt, less is more. That may do nothing, but we'll see. And I'm going to let the sheen die off of this just a little more. And with salt, you usually have to give it a while and be patient because the effects are not always immediate. The salt grinder gives me varied sizes. Actually, table salt works fine. I've used that. But it's going to create like a spotty, kind of a speckled flannel look. All right, I'm going to get my spray bottle just to help add some more texture. And as I said, I'm really trying to push the texture this time. Got my trigger sprayer, just barely open the nozzle, and we're gonna spritz it. And you see these spots? We'll create some little backgrounds. I want to let this painting paint a lot of itself. That's looking pretty cool. All right, so let's just let this dry and see what happens. Let the salt do its thing, and we'll come back at it again with another layer of washes. All right, this is dry enough, I think. Make sure you let it dry completely, and then you just brush all the salt off. But I've got a nice speckledy texture going here, something to build upon. And by the way, if you hear a whirring sound in the background, that's a fan. It's really hot in here, so apologize. So indecision, indecision, indecision. Not sure where I'm going to go from here. I want to get some areas really, really dark. I don't think I want to pre-wet this again. If I did, I'd need to do it with a spray bottle, but I think what I'm going to do instead is just spatter and start working in some textural spots and bits and whatever. I'm going to work probably in small sections. Let's just see how that works out. Again, a lot of Prussian blue here. A little bit of Quinacridone gold seeping in to make it greener. Let me add some Ultramarine Blue. And some red iron oxide. Maybe even some orange iron oxide. I'm going to grab my bamboo stick here. And maybe these are some roots. I'm just dragging the paint very lightly. This is almost kind of a test. I want to see if this is something I want to do more of. I think maybe it is. Alright, what happens if I put in some Granulation Medium? Granulation Medium can give you some dramatic effects, or it can give you no effects. I've had sort of mixed results with it. It works best in dark paint, heavy pigment, and it works best if you kind of work it around. If you let it just kind of dry flat and let all the washes just kind of seep together, you don't get as dramatic effect. You get the best effects when you put down some heavy paint and then add granulation medium right to the wash. At least I think so. Now, I haven't tried it. Anne Blockley, in her books, she says it works really great with inks. That's something I'd like to try. Actually, I have tried it with India ink. It does do some dramatic things with India ink. And you can use a pipette like this and get some of that granulation medium in there and just keep it in there and lay it. And then as you get ready to apply it, you know, just drip it where you want it. What I've seen and what I like is these rivulets that it creates. The temptation is to get too much water on the paper from either spray or spatter, and then everything melts together, you know. So I don't want to get any more water just yet. I may end up going over this with yet another layer. Let's use my stick, see what interesting things I can do with that. I think also I'm going to bring over a dry brush and just pick up some of these heavy bits. You know, everything is fair game. Your finger, a stick. And you can just use the stick like this just to break up an edge, you know. All right, I'm going to lift some more of this down here. Now see what the granulation medium did there. That's wonderful. But I'm going to pick up a little bit with my dry brush just so everything does not blend and bleed together too much. I'm trying to do this real-time commentary. It's very difficult to focus, concentrate on the painting sometimes when you do it. That's usually why I will do a voiceover. But once in a while, I like to just do it, you know, go for it and let you know what's going through my brain. The spatter just gives you some nice irregular wetting and creates these spider effects. Let's see what happens if I add a little granulation here. See how it's pushing back? Granulation medium doesn't really do anything except clump pigment together. And you can create little backgrounds with it. I got a kind of a blob here I'm not real happy with. Let me get some of this. This is this dark brown here is actually red iron oxide mixed with some ultramarine blue and Prussian blue. So it's producing kind of a deep brown. I want a tree here. I mean, I only just decided I want a tree here in the foreground that kind of comes up. So that'll be a detail we can work on later. Still all very wet, so I got to be careful or I'll just end up with a blended mess. And I'm asked about that a lot. You know, how do you do this and keep from everything bleeding together? Well, you just have to manage your water. It's that simple. You can add pigment in places, but you got to be careful with your water content. So I'm adding pretty heavy pigment here so that it will gently bleed in, but it won't push back or blend with all this other color. And again, as I mentioned a bit ago, once in a while you can take your brush, squeeze it dry, and just pick up in areas. That not only gets the water off the paper with some of the excess, it keeps your colors from bleeding together too much and preserves some highlights and contrast. We'll come back in here again with some dark, tending to disperse a little bit. I like that, having something right there. Sorry for the glare. I can't get rid of it completely. I'm going to hit it with just a little bit of spatter. And this is going to put more water on there, but I'm going to try to keep it away from this area, which is really wet right now. Just want to get some speckly texture in there. Let's see what happens if I add some granulation medium right there. Again, I'm just lightly putting in some tree trunks. If you do scratch the paper a little, that's fine. I mean, it's going to be permanent. Drying out my brush again. I'm just picking up some excess here to slow down that bleed process. I promised myself I was going to try a little bit of white ink somewhere. Back in the day, I used to use this a lot for airbrushing. Good ink. But I chose it because it's pretty opaque and it's got this little eyedropper. I could drop it in if I want. I think what I'm going to do... Oh, look at that. Just touch it. I'm not dropping any ink at all. This is just from what's on the end of the dropper. And that is a technique that could easily be overdone. That is really strong right there. Hey, no guts, no glory. Let me spritz it, see what happens. Kind of ruined my nice tree over there. See if we can bleed some of that out and get rid of some of the intensity. Let me add it. A couple more spots. Just so powerful. Was not expecting that. But I'll tell you something. I mean, you're seeing real time, me talking about it. This is how spontaneous painting evolved for me. And what it means to me, basically, it has been one of my chief teaching tools. Over the years, I've learned so much by doing this sort of thing, and I'm getting happier with that now. I'm softening some of that white ink, and it's one of the chief things that has just made watercolor 5 times, 10 times more exciting to me. All this ink is still very wet, so I can almost kind of do what I want to with it. Let me see if I can spritz it or spatter it with something. Just do some spattering in line with those highlights. Now that is cool. I have to admit, that is pretty cool right there. I love those little glows. Oh my goodness, that is just neat. Discovery, folks, that is just what it's all about. Now, if you're doing this, you're using your watercolor brushes, make sure you clean those things out immediately, because that is ink and it is permanent. I don't know why I always do these spontaneous landscapes in a triangular pyramid. I guess it's a composition my brain really likes. I try to break out of that every now and then, but if I'm not thinking about it, I just automatically go back to it. Maybe that's my signature thing. And I'm just trying right now to add some details that will benefit from a little bit of soft bleeding while this is still wet. All right, let's just let that thoroughly dry and we'll come back. I'll put it up on my easel and we'll get into some dry detail. All right, well, this is dry now. In fact, it has sat overnight. So I'm looking at it the next day, just kind of trying to decide what I'm going to do. Wanted to look at it with fresh eyes. Yeah, I think some of the experiments and the original goal to really push the texture and try some things, you know, from Anne Blockley's playbook. Some of that's been successful, but for the most part, I end up reverting to the way I normally do things. Although I did get some nice granulation. Let's zoom in on that. You can see it here. You can see it over here with the granulation medium. I'm really, really happy though. This experiment has paid off. And if I only come out with one new thing, I'm usually happy. And that is these white ink spots. They have dried lighter and less intense than when I put them down. So that's perfect. They were just a little too strong. I may add a little bit more subtle spatter. I really think that's a cool idea. It doesn't really destroy the watercolor feel of it. So even though it's opaque white, I think it's just a nice little mixed media effect. I'm going to do some spatter of paint, so I'm just going to have fun detailing this and take you along as I do it. I don't know if this will work, but I've got some quinacridone rust here. I want to spatter a little of that in, and I have thinned it only with granulation medium. You can see what the granulation medium does. It really depends on the paint. It works better with darker paint. I've been told it works better with ink. I have tried it with India ink, you know, on some experiments. It is dramatic with India ink, but you can see it here. So what I'm going to do is mix up some more of this quinacridone rust, heavily diluted with granulation medium, and then I'm going to spatter that actually on the painting. So here's a bit of quinacridone rust. It's been diluted entirely with granulation medium, no water. Now these spatters are probably too fine to see any granulation, but I'm going to spritz them a little bit, so if it only adds a little bit to the texture, that's okay. I want to get some spatter out here in these sort of blank smooth areas, and maybe over here. And then I'm spritzing it to get some of those bigger droplets to run. So all kind of little experiments going on here. If you spatter on this way by tapping it on another brush handle, the more you spatter, the finer it gets as you go. And so I like to, where I want the heavier dots, you know, I'll start first. And then as I get finer dots, I'll take it to areas where some finer dots might be nice. And I don't want to do too much more than that because I'll end up obliterating some of the nice little color clouds and values. And this is a pretty bright color compared to what I had been painting here. If you're spattering and you see a blob that's too dark, just blot it up with some tissue. And it's probably hard to see, but you are getting a little bit of extra texture in some of these little spatter dots from that granulation medium. So that's kind of cool. And then overall, I think you can see there's some nice granulation texture going on. Right now, I'm just going to put some clear water spatter all over the painting. That won't do a whole lot to the dried paint, but I can go in here now maybe and paint some areas. And instead of just getting a little bit of paint or a little dark paint, I'll get some creeping marks. So in other words, I'm not just putting down a wash, I'm putting down a wash or some details in places that will hit some of these droplets and do some interesting things. And I'm just going to enhance some spots of contrast. In the greens and the blues, I used a lot of Prussian Blue. I don't think I mentioned this at the beginning because of the fact that compared to a Phthalo Green Blue shade or a Phthalo Blue, Prussian Blue granulates, and those do not. So I wanted something that would naturally granulate in addition to some of the other texture techniques. I'm just going to go over here. I want this tree. You know what? When I start doing foliage detail, I need to get my Levinson brush out because of what the tip will do for me. Best foliage brush ever, for details anyway. This is the small goat and synthetic blend. Since most of you will get questions about that in almost every single video. Which one is that? Which one is that? It is the Levinson small goat and synthetic blend. They have a small, I think they have a medium, they have a large. All of them, regardless of size, have this needle fine point, and the length of which that point just provides this little dancy calligraphic mark making. I'm just dotting in some green in places here, but I'm not sure that I'm finished yet with the texturing. I'm going to add something darker. I'm going to actually utilize this. I added the Paynes Gray to this. I'm going to actually add some green. This is going to make our sort of a olive green. And you can get close and you can get relatively precise, or you can get far away and spatter over a larger area. Spatter is something that can be overdone though. Down here where I've got these bigger spatters, I'm just going to hit it with some water spatter. I'm going to continue to paint with this Granulation Medium thinned paint. It's dark green. And I've got a spatter wash down here, so it's going to paint some shapes for me automatically. That's always exciting to see. I love that so much. This run was unexpected but beautiful. Start painting in some impressions of some trees here. I want to give the impression of some tree, maybe not fir trees, but different tree canopies going on back here. I just have this brush on its edge, and these little shapes that kind of painted themselves over here, I'm just going to dab in at the bottom of some of them. Some little shadowy charges. And there you have a most gorgeous passage that pretty much painted itself. One of the most exciting thing about doing these spontaneous paintings is where you see edges developing naturally. You can enhance those. If things get to looking too chaotic, you can combine some values by painting washes over them. And I want to just, get some of these tree trunks to kind of weave in and out and peek in and out. It just kind of gives a little more context to what all of this is back here. One of the things you want to make sure of is these trees that appear to be more distant, make sure that your values are appropriate. It's very easy to get too dark if you have something that already looks pale and distant. Think about your distance perspective or your aerial perspective. And just adding a few branches back here. Very, very fine. Give that some scale. I like how that's pulling that out there. So that's kind of helping balance this out. I think I have a little bit more extensive and interesting composition now, even if it is pyramidic. Maybe get one of these fir trees to break that plane and be a little bigger. These straight up and down trunks from stands of fir trees, it's just, I think, such a neat design device. I like using them a lot. All right, I am going to grab a bristle brush. It's a fairly soft brush as bristles go, but it's stiffer than a watercolor brush. Just going to look around and see if there's any place I can do some lifting, which will define some highlights. And when I do this, I usually try to find places that are already a little lighter but also makes sense for a highlight. So, and you can easily overdo this as well. And you don't have to scrub back to white. You know, a lot of times it's just enough to lift a little of that really dark paint and create some, a little more definition, but it stays mysterious. And I'm just getting water on the end of this brush. No paint. I'm doing very light loosening of the paint till I can see it's loose and light, and then I'm just kind of blotting. Some artists like to use a slight sideways wipe. I never found that necessary, but I hope you can see that's already like brought a little more definition to this really dark middle ground, foreground tree. And you have to think not in terms of the shape of the tree so much. Well, you do have to think of that, but where is the light coming in? Because what you're doing here is you're painting light. You're saying, where do I want light to hit on this? Another thing you can do while you've got this brush in your hand, you see an edge that you want to soften, that's a great brush to do it with. And I just keep the loosening of this paint, I just keep the strokes very gentle. Because the more you abrade the paper, the more it'll take on this kind of fleckish look. Although in this heavily textured painting, that would probably be pretty well disguised, but still, it's just, it starts to look like it was rubbed if you rub too much. You could get out a scrubber, I mean a literal scrubber brush that has extremely stiff bristles, but I don't really find that necessary in these subtle highlights that are not really all that light. They're just, compared to the dark paint around them, they're light. I'm liking that pretty well. I may make some more tweaks after looking at it for another 24 hours, but I think by and large I'm done. Let's do a quick tape reveal here. I think that's done. I'm pretty satisfied with that. How about putting down in the comments for me, what texture techniques have you tried? Tell me what you've done successfully, what your favorite texture creating techniques are. Have any of you tried the white ink? What was your experience with it? Let me know. Thanks everyone. Appreciate you watching. Thank you so much, patrons, for your support. It's so important for this channel, and we'll see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.